Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Start Fun Learning event. I see that a lot of you have joined under my name, so that's now on our part. If you could rename yourself by right-clicking on your name, that would be very helpful. First things first, this learning event will be held in English with live interpretation. The instructions are on the screen and should help you to navigate the Zoom meeting and allow you to join the right channel by clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. So if you are an English speaker, please select the English channel. If you are a French speaker, please select the French channel. And if you are comfortable in both languages, you can stay in the main channel. You don't need to do anything. Please note that this learning event will be recorded. We ask that you keep yourselves muted when not speaking. And if you would like to ask a question or comment on any, please raise your hand or put your question in the chat if you have any questions or comments. I hope that everyone has now been able to select the right channel and we'll get started then. If you are having difficulties, my colleague Chiara will put the instructions in the chat as well. So welcome to our Start Fun Learning event focused on accountability to affected populations. My name is Victor Meninga and I'm a Start Fund's meal advisor and I will be facilitating today's event. I'm also joined by a few of my colleagues, particularly Lavinia Loperfido, also Start Fund's meal advisor, and Chiara Boggi, Start Fund's meal officer, and both of them will be supporting today's event as well. As you may know, the Start Fund organises learning exchanges for completed alerts that take place after project implementation. These are attended by the organisations who implemented a response, as well as by the decision-making committees, and offer opportunities to share challenges, experiences, and best practices around particular responses. In 2024, we are trialling a new approach to allow for more learning to be shared across the Start Fund membership between organisations, whether they have implemented a response recently or not. Our first learning event focuses on accountability to affected populations in short-term humanitarian projects, which was also the theme of our 2023 external evaluation. My colleague will share the link to this evaluation in the chat as well. We will listen to presentations from the evaluators today around key member-facing recommendations, and we will also hear from ActionAid Nigeria about their experiences of AAP, and there will be opportunities for you to ask any questions to the presenters as well. We also, however, hope to provide some space for each one of you to participate and to share a challenge, a best practice, or anything else valuable, either via the chat, by raising your hand and coming off mute, or via the Mentimeter platform. We would like this learning event to be as interactive and informative as possible. As this is our first learning event, we would appreciate any feedback that you may have for us at the end or after the learning event, so we can make any adjustments for a following one. So before moving into our first presentations, we wanted to give the opportunity to share with us any challenges that your organisation currently faces to ensuring accountability to affected populations in short-term humanitarian projects. If you're able to, please join our Mentimeter via the details that are on the screen, or by clicking on the link that Chiara will add into the chat now. And if able, please type a short response to the question. You are also welcome to put your responses in the chat if that is easier. We will be using the Mentimeter throughout the learning event, so please do keep this open so you can participate throughout the event. And we will keep the first question open during the first presentation so you can add anything else that comes to mind throughout the presentation. So I'm just going to stop here to allow for you for 1 minute to add any responses to that question to the Mentimeter here. And these can be as short or as long as you would like these to be. So we have one comment coming up, the lack of resources and the understanding of how to implement AAP and never prioritized. I think that's a very important point. I think AAP does need to be prioritized to be able to be done correctly. Do we have any others? An assumption that it's hard, a lack of trained staff, insufficient time to consult the affected populations on their preferred feedback mechanisms and setting them up, challenges identifying how to support the long-term needs of community members and involving community perceptions and project design. Thank you very much, everyone. I think those are some of the challenges that are quite common and are mentioned by many organizations. Time is also an important one, as we'll probably discover today in the learning event. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave this the Mentimeter open. So if you do have any additional challenges that you want to mention, feel free to add to these over the next 20 minutes. Without further ado, I would like to hand over now to Kate and Angie, Associate Consultants at Tsunagu, who worked on our external evaluation last year and who will share some of the key findings and recommendations with us. Feel free to share your screens, Kate and Angie. If anyone does have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will get to these after the presentations. If you would also like to upvote any questions, please add a thumbs up to the relevant question if possible, rather than repeating a similar one, and then we can look at the questions that we can ask afterwards. Thank you very much, and over to you, Angie and Kate.
Thanks, Vibke. Great. Wonderful. Okay, next slide. As Vibke mentioned, my name is Angie and I'm a consultant with Tsunagu, and today we're going to talk through just a very specific part of the evaluation. There was several evaluation questions and several interesting findings which echo many of the challenges that you raised in the first Mentimeter question. But today we're really going to just share the overview of findings focusing on the first evaluation question, which was to what extent are affected and at-risk populations taken account of, given account to, and hold humanitarian agencies and donors to account in key stages of the project cycle. So that's really a big question, but for us, we were looking at accountability, specifically participation of affected populations, information sharing, and complaints and feedback mechanisms. We're covering the key findings and recommendations that were outlined in 3 country case studies. So we worked with ActionAid in Nigeria, we worked with Plan in Cameroon, and Cadena in Guatemala. Oops, if you could go back one, thanks. So these were the 3 case studies, and we used different types of participatory approaches to collect data with communities themselves. This is in addition to other methods, including a document review and several key informant interviews. Next slide, please. So in each project area, we held gender-separate focus group discussions, and we used several traditional participatory activities to help us learn more about communities' perceptions of accountability within each of the projects. The first exercise we did was a timeline, where we asked each group, each participant, women and men separately, as well as household interviews for older people or people who were not able to come to the focus groups, to explain to us what happened during the lifetime of the project, starting with the shock that occurred all the way to what they felt was the end of the project. And as you can see here on the screen, we have 2 different project sites. So in yellow, this is a disease outbreak response. And in blue, the blue country was an early action response to food insecurity. And what we found was that we see differences by gender in the number of touch points that people remembered in a project. And also we see differences across projects depending on the type of communication channels. So if we look at the yellow project, the disease outbreak, we see that for the men's group, they had 3 times that they were involved in the project from their perspective. They participated in a household survey, they received a phone call about distribution day and time, and then they received a kit. For the women's group, they had slightly less participation, where they didn't participate in the household survey and largely were just passive recipients of the project. In the blue timeline, we can see that there are many, many different time points where communities felt that they were involved and were aware of what was happening in the project. The difference between these two, we can understand from the fact that in the disease outbreak scenario, there was very limited contact with the households. There were not many information channels that were used to share or communicate with the population. Whereas in the early action food insecurity response, there was a very active community committees that were regularly involved in the project, speaking to the project staff, as well as WhatsApp groups and other community mechanisms for communication. So they had a very high awareness of the different types of activities within the project. So information sharing here we can see varies across projects and countries based on the number of communication channels we use. Next slide, please. We also did a ranking exercise to help us understand who is influencing and participating in key decisions in the project. So you can see here that we looked at key points in a project, and these are outlined either in the yellow or in the green. So we looked at the selecting assistants, selecting beneficiaries, delivering assistance, and selecting information channels or complaints mechanisms. And what we can see here largely is that in, again, the project on the left, which is a disease outbreak response, which had limited contact with the beneficiaries, versus a project that was post-conflict response, we can see that there was a higher level of engagement by the community. Whereas in the first project, in the disease outbreak, you can see there's a small NGO icon. So this is the groups, the women and the men's group indicated that the NGO was the organization, was making all of the decisions, and that they were largely not involved in any of the decisions or in the project. However, if we look at the project with the green bar, we can see that people felt largely more involved. And we can see this because in this project, which ActionAid will share more with us, they had a specific focus on women's engagement, both through involvement in data collection for the needs assessment, but also women were the direct beneficiaries in the project. And so we can see here that women felt that they were very involved in selecting the assistants. And then as the project moves on, though, we can also see that the NGO was often perceived to be making most of the decisions, but there was more community engagement in this project. Next slide, please. We also asked the community to do a participation ladder. And what this helped us to see is that there was largely very passive participation for population subgroups. So this includes older people or women with larger families. Some households reported participating in a survey made them feel that they were influencing decisions. So if we unpack a little bit this diagram, at the bottom of the ladder, we have receiving assistance. So all of the households indicated that they were involved in the receipt of assistance. Slightly fewer houses were received information. So already we can see a difference that people felt they weren't involved in the project. They didn't even receive information. Even fewer households were reported being invited to a meeting or visited at home. So again, we see that the participation is mostly at the lower end of the participation ladder. And then at the top, only a few households were involved in making decisions, but that was only through a survey. So I'll hand it over now to Kate to talk through some of the recommendations based on the findings from the community level data collection. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Angie. So yes, returning to some of these findings, let's start off with what we found with community structures. So we saw that existing community structures are not always representative of the affected population, and they may not always share the same perspective on the type of assistance that's required. So in the second case study or project that we looked at, that we'll hear more about in a moment with Nigeria, despite the NGO having concerns regarding the flow of information through the community leader, this wasn't challenged by community members, and it didn't prohibit women from having a higher perception of their involvement in decision making. We'll talk more about that in a moment and the importance of inclusion when it comes to accountability. it's important to strike a balance between engaging official structures and doing outreach to beneficiaries from different population subgroups to cross-check how represented are they by community structures. So this was evident in the third project that we looked at closely, which where there was an Indigenous Community Development Council that was managing the installation of water systems at the community level for flood-prone areas. And this CDC was the official structure responsible for investments in the community, and it was made up entirely of men. The Women's Committee sat under that CDC and provided household level assistance like food baskets and medical support. So all that to say, in this context, beneficiaries participating in the household level interviews had an overall high perception of their participation, even though their engagement was primarily was through community meetings and information sharing. So in other words, not through official structures per se. So representation has to be explored just as perspectives on the kind of assistance should be considered across subgroups. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. So the communication profile of the affected population is really important to consider throughout. It can vary from different levels of literacy and languages that are required, that may involve different kinds of communication channels. So our key informant interviews revealed that collaborating with partners to incorporate subgroups' views on information sharing and selecting communication channels for CFMs was an effective approach. So for example, one LNNGO engaged a local organization of people with disabilities to support the inclusion of people with disabilities. And another LNNGO partnered with an INGO with expertise on inclusion of older people. So asking people, including representative of these population subgroups, their preferred communication channels during the needs assessment can really inform the design of that complaints and feedback mechanism. In the first project that we looked at, which was a cholera outbreak response, the CFM channels included a distribution help desk, complaints box, feedback directly to the NGO staff. And in that case, while men participating in the focus group discussions perceived that women were more aware of how to share complaints, women reported that they did not know how to ask questions or share feedback. So in fact, participants shared that they preferred face-to-face interaction through increased NGO staff presence in the community and direct access through phone calls. Okay, so that really demonstrates the importance of having that balance of channels that are in person as well as ways to access from a distance. So using a range of communication channels ensures that information flows between those affected populations and NGOs are taking place, even if there are challenges with traditional leadership. Next slide, please. So when it comes to information sharing, and all of these topics are interrelated, obviously, it may seem obvious, but in a short-term project that is during an emergency, it's important to remember that accountability includes sharing information on how decisions are made and by whom. So when external factors might limit one area of accountability, like participation, the level of effort may need to increase in other areas, so like information sharing. In the second project, again in Nigeria, beneficiaries said their participation was limited to surveys and receiving items through the distribution. And all but one woman reported participation, or sorry, this is a different project, not Nigeria, my apologies. And all but one woman reported participation beyond receiving assistance. So it's important for information sharing to not just be, apologies. Yeah, so in that case, in that project that we looked at, information sharing was also limited due to short duration of the project. And people suggested that alternative channels for information sharing would have been very helpful. So they brought up religious leaders, phone calls, SMS. It's worth mentioning that in our key informant interviews, we found that staff training as a part of information sharing and communication is very important, as was mentioned in the first Mentimeter responses. So these trainings that include soft skills like listening and empathy are an important part of communicating respect and, of course, really building trust. So when frontline staff are listening to suggestions for alternative channels, future programming has a much better chance of engaging beneficiaries and providing opportunities for participation. Next slide. So when it comes to diving a little deeper with population subgroups, we mentioned earlier that directly involving women led to a higher perception of their involvement in decision making. So in one of the projects that we explored, women consistently ranked their influence higher than men in the community, even though women also said that the NGO and community leaders largely made the decisions. And again, we'll hear more about that from ActionAid in a moment. The differences in ranking could be attributed to women being the primary source of information during the assessments, the need assessments, and direct recipients of assistance. So this relates to one of our recommendations on beneficiary outreach, which is to ask specific granular questions on those aspects that are central to accountability, like how were people from different population subgroups consulted during the needs assessment? So while an external perspective might perceive the women's engagement as extractive, women in this case still valued the participation. And this really reinforces why it's important to allow affected populations to define how and when they participate. Creating specific opportunities for all population subgroups to participate is also a really important consideration throughout a project. And while these opportunities to participate are essential, care should also be taken that power dynamics are at play and gender and cultural norms play an important role in whether people ultimately do feel empowered to participate in these opportunities. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much to both of our presenters. I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation. We will come to any questions after the following presentation. If you do have any other questions, please do put them into the chat now so that we can address them in a while. But before we move on, we have a few more poll questions for you, which are based on some of the recommendations that Tsunagu has made. So if you could please open up your Mentimeter again, and we will get to some of the following questions. And yeah, Kiara has put the link into the chat again to that Mentimeter. So our first question is, do you actively involve the most vulnerable subgroups? So for example, women, young people, the elderly, or people with disabilities in the needs assessment stage? So I'll just leave it up here for a second so you can respond to that question. If you do have any comments related to these questions, please do also feel free to reflect on those in the chat as well. So we're pretty equal right now, but most people do tend to always, often, or sometimes involve vulnerable subgroups at the needs assessment stage. I'll just give it another few seconds. Do we have any more responses? Cool. So most people do tend to always involve those vulnerable subgroups in the needs assessment stage. It would be interesting later on in the discussion part to hear how exactly you go about this, especially in the context of short-term humanitarian projects such as the Start Fund project. So it'd be interesting to hear from you around this. We'll move on to the next question then. And this question is, do you ask communities and specifically subgroups at the needs assessment stage what their preferred communication channels are? So this is a recommendation that Tsunagu had in our evaluation. So four votes for sometimes. It would be interesting also to hear from you why that is the case, why you only involve them sometimes, and ask communities sometimes in the needs assessment stage about this. So if you do have any further comments, please also put those in the chat. We'll give it another few seconds for any last minute votes on this question. I see that there is a comment from Karen in the chat. I would assume that for Start Fund project that we are working with communities where we have pre-existing communication channels. In Christian Aid, we consult communities on their preferred communication channels when it is safe to do so and when additional access doesn't put them at risk. I think that is a very important and valid comment. Thank you, Karen, for sharing that. I'm going to move over to the next question. When access difficulties limit community participation at the early project stages, do you increase information sharing efforts as a result? So we have a few votes for often and sometimes. It would be interesting to hear as well how you go about doing this. So how do you share information when you're not able to access communities? So if you want to put a comment about this, what your organization does in the chat, please do so. So majority does do this often. 4 people do this sometimes. Give it another few seconds. There is a question from Nancy in the chat. If access is a challenge, how is information shared in such a context? It is a very good question. So if anyone does have any examples of what they do, feel free to come in or to put a response in the chat as well. Okay, let's move on to the final question then, and we can always get back to Nancy's question later. So the final question is whether does your agency work with existing community structures to implement humanitarian projects? So this could be community committees, for example. So most people voting always. Great, I'll leave it up for another few seconds. a few comments in the chat from Karen and Jean-Claude. When access is difficult, methods such as WhatsApp, Telegram groups, radio, community volunteer networks are often used, but also sharing information through different actors such as government or other humanitarian agencies who may have better access to the communities is always a good solution. Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for your responses. We can discuss some of these in more detail during the discussion part of this learning event later. But we will now move on to the next presentation, which is from Ogbede Ame from ActionAid Nigeria. And he will talk to you about some of ActionAid Nigeria's processes around AAP. As always, if you do have any questions or comments, please put those in the chat, and also feel free to upvote any questions that are already in the chat as well. I hope you can see this presentation, and Ogbede, over to you.
All right, thank you, BFK. Am I audible enough?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. All right, I think I need to minimize this too. All right, thank you. Action in Nigeria has implemented several start fund projects across different states in the country. These interventions have been through consortiums where we intervene through other partner organizations, or we do directly as ActionAid alone. These interventions have been across various regions of the country, either the northern part of the country, the southern part of the country as well. And the type of interventions have been around crisis. I mean, the type of crisis have been around natural disasters like flooding, which you can see in the pictures here. This was one of the communities we went in October last year. A community in the the central part of the country where the community was flooded. This is, pictorials we took from the community during the need assessment. And we have as well communal clashes, conflict, and displacement. Type of activities and interventions we do food assistance through cash for food. Not unconditional. It's not unconditional cash, but it's cash for food. We do non-food items, NFIs, where we give items like blankets, water cans, cups, plates, mosquito nets, all depending on the choices of the communities as to what they want. We also do water and sanitation assistance, soft and wash and hard components of wash assistance. We also do psychosocial support, where we train people to be psychosocial, to help the community through therapy management, because some of them must have gone through traumas, through crises. So the people we train during the psychosocial support trainings help us to build the community strength to go through the difficult times. We've gone through some challenges this period. For instance, if you see these communities we have in the picture here, accessing that community was a difficult experience. I was there myself. It was a community flooded, heavily flooded, and to get to the beneficiaries, we should see the buildings in the midst of the water here. We needed to use the boat. And the higher the level of water, the more difficult it is to get to them. But because we needed to do the right thing and have access to the real people, we had to engage the means which they engage, which was using the boat by using security jackets and protective items as well to enable us access to the communities. Another one could be access to community on itself, like security challenges. There's a community who are presently, the current START project we're implementing in Benin as well. We're implementing the community that has had communal clashes, which has led to the displacement of the people. In that, because of the displacement and the clashes, we couldn't access the communities. The community has been completely deserted, so access to the community has been restricted. Getting access to the people that need this assistance, we had to, because they are now displaced and living within the host communities, so we had to figure out how to reach out to the community members living within the host community. So access to the community itself was hindered because the extremists are in the communities, taking over the community themselves. So most times we have access, challenges with access and security, as it were. So these are some of our challenges. Can we go to the next slide? In trying to talk about how affected communities participate in our project cycle, Action in Nigeria adopts an inclusive approach to decision making, recognizing the importance of diverse perspectives in shaping policies and programs. This means that when we're all very open-minded when we go to communities, because we know that there are peculiarities with different communities. The experiences you have in the southern part of the country are totally different from your experiences you expect in the northern part of the countries. So when setting out to implement in different places, we go with this subconsciousness, and we in trying to engage the inclusive approach to implementing, we're all very mindful of peculiarities of community cultures and all that and the differences. But in all the experiences, we try by every means to involve the communities communities in our decision making, from access to community, from community entry like assessment, to the profiling, to community setup, to all through the processes. The consciousness of the community peculiarities, we carry it along and we still engage the community in our processes. Action recognizes the barriers that women face when participating in decision making. Action prioritizes creating safe space and supportive spaces where women feel comfortable expressing their views and opinions. Actually, globally, as a federation, we have a humanitarian signature, which one of our core principles is giving power to women. We love to build capacities of women. We love to leave women with strength, with courage of conviction, not just because we're implementing, but by the time we're done with our implementation, must have transferred some strength of knowledge to the women. So this consciousness enables us to deliberately seek out how to engage women and affect the community generally, but particular bias for women, so that women are directly and more consciously involved all through our process. This we've always succeeded in achieving across our communities. Again, being mindful of the peculiarities so that we don't infringe on community cultures and their ways of beliefs. Actually, Nigeria prioritizes consultation and collaborations with women and other subgroups at all levels of decision making, from community entry, agenda setting, to implementation and evaluation. The last community we went, which I was privileged to be part of the community, to be part of the people that did the community entry activity, it was difficult to access people, but in spite of the difficulty, we ensured that every access we had, women were part of our group. And we wouldn't by any means be able to give assistance to the people in need if we don't have access to the right people. So our approach from top-bottom, our top-bottom approach enables us, conscious top-bottom approach, so that we don't compromise in the process. Conscious top-bottom approach enable us to have access to everybody in the process, from reaching out through the government structures to the highest community levels, cascading it down to the very people in need, has often consistently enabled us to have access to these people. And that has been our success story. In setting up community humanitarian committees, when we get to a community at the community entry level, we ensure that we set up a community humanitarian committee at the community sensitization entry level phase of our activity. After we must have gotten men and women together, all in a group, to let them know why we come. At that point, we try to share power. We don't try to own the system to ourselves again. We try to get the buy-in of the community by engaging them, by owning the space. We may be the people that brought the intervention, but we collectively do it together with them. And that's time we set up the community humanitarian committees, which is always 70% of women and 30% of men across all our communities. That's our humanitarian signature. We try not to bridge it or compromise it anytime we go to implement. We determine vulnerable communities and people. One of the ways we the communities, affected communities participate in our project circles is determining vulnerable communities and people. Like we are very sensitive to figure out and ensure that every group of people are engaged in the process. And this is done, like I said, in our community entry phase. These people we set up at the community entry phase, they help us do a lot. We can't know the needs of the community. We may know the overarching need of the community by maybe probably being affected by crisis or flood affected community, but we don't know the deep detailed needs of the communities. So it's by setting up the communities, it's by engaging the communities from the community entry phase that enables us to narrow down to their very needs of the community and we give assistance according to their needs. And at the community entry level phase, where we set up the community humanitarian committees, is when we set up our information sharing patterns with the platforms or pathways, as it were, with the communities. We most predominantly we use the complaints desk because that fund is very short-term and we can't afford to start, setting up the mobile channels or every of those long process kind of information sharing channels. Most predominantly, we use the complaints desk and we work through the community humanitarian committees as well. Can we go to the next slide? Hi, okay. All right. All right. This is talking about selection of our CFM channels. At the community entry level, where we meet the community for the first time, we try to do our findings from community stakeholders. We work in close consultation with the communities. Every group genuinely represented at this forum. That's where we come to. Of course, when you come to the community and you know that the options are limited, for the formality's sake and for the sense of inclusion, we try to still make this open and known to them that these are options, but I think for the peculiarity of that situation and the short-term nature of start fund, this is the one we will have to opt for, which is often the case of the CFM. There's like you see in the picture here. And literacy level of the community is one of the key considerations to put in place while setting up this. So this means that anybody going to man the desk must be somebody that speaks the language of the community. And another thing we consider is accessibility. We will not go to set up a toll-free line for the community for a 45-day intervention and start fund it, for instance. So we are very mindful and very proactive to ensure that we don't do those long routes of community feedback mechanisms access so to set up and burden the communities. So we use the CFM desk most exclusively. Again, one of the essence of using the CFM desk is the usability because it's easy to access, easy to use, and the turnaround time for complaints handling and everything is very swift and proactive. Can we go to the next slide? All right. One of the ways to share information with the community members is through consultation meetings, like the community entry phase. Of course, after coming from the community entry level, where we set up the humanitarian community humanitarian committees and every of the groups we set up, which comprises of 70% women and 30% men, we still come because there's a period to come for profiling, there's a period to come for revalidation of our list, there's a period to come for token distribution. There are different stages of engagement with the community. And at every of these stages of engagement, we do consultations. We don't come in isolation with the community. We don't come, we don't do that in isolation of the communities. We often and every other time do this through consultations with the community. Again, the community humanitarian committees, they use public address systems like megaphones. They carry megaphones and microphones to go through their community to share information with the community members. To let them know different information like the distribution dates, the peculiarity with the information, intervention pattern, approaches. They help us to go through the communities with the public address system to share information with the communities. I have hotline here because initially when I prepared the slide, to do the back and forth with my staff people, I had this included, but narrowing it down in specifics to start fund. Hotline is not often used, but it's one of our approaches we use in action aid, generally. For start fund intervention, we don't use hotline. Start fund is we use exclusively, most exclusively, the help desk, and we work through the community, humanitarian committees as well. Can we go to the next slide? Hi, Web. All right. Talking about inclusion of women in decision making. Now, the picture you see here, that is me doing one of our community entry activities, doing community sensitization. All right. Introducing these 4 options. Okay, I'll take note and.
Yeah, we'll come to the
right,
questions later.
Okay,
We've got about 5 more minutes left.
That's fine, that's fine. This is doing community entry activities. That's me trying to talk to the community members. If you see quite closely here, there are more men here and women there. This is a community that is pretty sensitive about women and men sitting together in public. Regardless of that consciousness, we try to bring everybody to a close space. They may not sit together all swamped up, but everybody will hear the information being shared. At this forum, we're trying to have their buy-in to make them know that women are going to be involved as well as the men, and we have more priority for women in this sense. So this is a very clear pictorial example of what I was trying to explain earlier. One of our buying approaches, because women inclusion is a priority for action, it is a humanitarian signature. It is strong force for us anytime we go for humanitarian works and interventions anywhere. Among others, we seek to have the buy-in of the communities with some of these strong points for them to respond, like women respond stronger to gender issues. Like during distribution, we distribute dignity kits to women of reproductive age, and men cannot make decision of those dignity kits. Women have to make the decision. So we tend to bring those issues for them, for effectiveness of the process, to bring in diverse perspective, the views of the women as against the men, contributing to the men's views as well, to promote gender fairness, and again, to enhance the capacity of these women, even after intervention was carried out. Can we go to the next slide? Hi, Web. Are you for real? Can we?
Yeah. The connection's not that great. I wonder if you stop your video, the connection might be better.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
All right.
Please.
I think. All right. Okay. That's okay. So this is peculiar. In specificity, how we do our AAP in short-term interventions, we always use the leave no one behind approach from beginning of the project. We were often it's now consciousness entry into the community. At no point of engagement in the community, from community entry to throughout all the processes, the communities are involved. They're involved in all that. The only decision we took on our own was to go there. But any decisions we take from the people from the sub-minute of the communities that should benefit, they help us in the decision making. But of course, we come up with our vulnerability criteria and selection criteria, but they help us in the decision of the places that are the most vulnerable locations before we make our selections as well. We do consultations. Consultations should start from the very key decision makers within the communities, from the first entry into the community. Like I said earlier, we do consistently do consultations. We work towards engaging contextual AAP model that suits well with the community. This means that the AAP model that works in the north may not work in the south. So we're always very mindful of these peculiarities and work with those contexts as well. We conduct assessment to ensure that AAP initiatives are responsive to specific needs and priorities of the communities. Like I said, we will not take a toll-free line to a start fund intervention, for instance. So we know it's short term, we know it's quick, fast paced, And sometimes when there's no network in the community, they don't even contemplate taking to freelance such communities. So we're often very mindful of responding to specific needs and priorities of the communities with regards to AAP. We empower local communities to identify their own needs, their priorities, and solutions, and support them in taking collective actions to address these challenges. Meaning that when we get to communities, like I said, the committees we set up, they help us in decision making. We can't come to a community that, okay, I give you an instance. One of the communities we went the last time, mosquito net was not their priority, but if we didn't sit together with them, okay, that's fine. All right, so the another approach that recognizes and address the intersecting form of discrimination. This is enabled by recognizing multiple identities like the people with disability who understand power dynamics, where the power rests more, and we do centralize, we're centering marginalized voices and adopting a collaborative approach. This is all about community engagement. I mean, all through our processes. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is the end.
Thank you so much, Roberta. Thank you for your presentation. We now have some time for some of your questions that you've been putting in the chat to our presenters. And I will pass it over to Lavinia to facilitate this bit. And we will go through some of your questions now. And I'll stop sharing the screen as well.
Thank you, Vika. Thank you, Bede. So yes, we had a few questions for Tsunagu at the beginning, and these were one in particular about whether it was just women that were asked about their active inclusion or exclusion by pre-existing community power structures. And also we have still from Karen a comment about needs assessment that can cause actually harm and duplicate multiple pre-existing needs assessments. So in that case, locally led initiative can define needs through this approach rather than replicating, conducting another one-off assessment and assuming that a one-off assessment is viable. So leveraging locally led initiatives could be better. Also because adding vulnerable groups to another needs assessment could be exhausting. So yes, a comment and a question for.
Okay. Great. Maybe on the first question. So on the methodology, in each country, we had a focus group. We asked each partner to select people that were project beneficiaries. And then we divided them into focus group discussions with men, focus group discussions with women, and then we also had individual interviews with older people, or for example, in Guatemala, there were women who couldn't come to the focus group discussions, so that they did an individual interview at the household level with them. So we asked the different groups, and we didn't necessarily ask about inclusion or exclusion. It was really just a participation and ranking exercise with the different groups in the community, including people as beneficiaries themselves. So we didn't ask explicit questions about exclusion or inclusion. We just asked about, who made the decisions, who were all the people who made the decisions, and who is the most influential in making decisions about the project. On the multiple needs assessment, I can really only speak from the evaluation sample. But interestingly, what we found both in the sample of community level focus group discussions, but also the majority of projects we reviewed 55 projects, they were not communities that organizations had a previous presence in. So that was, I think, also an interesting finding for us. So I think some of the assumptions around whether or not the communities had been already included in a previous needs assessments weren't necessarily validated in the sample that we looked at. So these were communities that were affected by a shock that was then responded to by a Start Fund partner. So they weren't necessarily locations where they had a previous presence. I don't know, Kay, if you have anything to add.
No, thanks, Angie. That is an important point to highlight. I think also when it comes to needs assessment, sometimes, and I don't think this is what is implied with the comment, but but we can think of them as if they have been done in the recent past, then, or if the communities are known, then it may not need to be done again. But what we found, and in general, I think, speaking just from personal practice, is really beneficial to treat that as an iterative process and something to see as a dynamic relationship with the community, asking those questions more often, given that in this case, we were evaluating a shock, so things could have changed dramatically for those communities.
Thank you very much. Now we have a few questions, and I think these were more for Ukbede. So there was one question in the chat. What types of challenges did you encounter while introduced the four options regarding information sharing with community members?
Yeah, we minimize our challenges by engaging the communities. Like we would have confronted outright challenges if we came in isolation of the communities to impose a information sharing channel with them. The channels we use are their choices. So as a way, we won't experience any challenges, right? So we are deploying their option to them. You get, like, we are deploying these very two options: community management committees, community humanitarian committees rather, and the CFM desk. So these are options that are often available with the nature of start implementation. So, and we share this with them among many other options which are often not possible to be used within the communities. And in that sense, there won't be challenges. We've not ever experienced any challenges as it were, because these two options we often use are the ones that are available and are decided with them together, collectively. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And actually, there was another question from the chat. How can we increase active women's participation in focus groups? As it's often challenging for them to voice their opinion, and they may tend to agree with other people's opinions. So.
Yes, I think involving women in community decision making is about deliberately trying to have the buy-in of the community from the very beginning, because there's a place of power fight, power sharing. Like I said to somebody yesterday, I said you need to make the communities know that it's not about power sharing, but it's about inclusion. It's about bringing voices together to make sense. And all these things happen at the negotiation table during community entry. You make them know we need, for instance, our often strong point is from the place of men cannot make decisions for women when it comes to dignity kits. There are sanitary issues and all those. So we try to have a very subtle bargain with them to have the men to buy into these negotiations and have their backing. And once we have the backing of the community from the beginning, that we're not imposing or not infringing on their community ways of living, we won't have any frictions all through our processes of implementation. The idea is just to have their buy-in from the beginning.
Thank you so much. Very clear. And a final one.
Maybe Lavinia, could I just add something on that question quickly?
Please.
I think what we found with the focus group discussions and the evaluation was that it worked well to not just have a verbal discussion, but to actually have hands-on activities where we could, for example, we printed out the icons for, women's groups, men group, community leaders. And if you pass out, for example, if you have hands-on activities where you can actually put, everyone has to do something in the group discussion. So, okay, now it's your turn to tell us who was the most influential from your perspective in selecting beneficiaries. And so when you have an activity where people can do things hands-on versus just a verbal discussion, you can control a little bit more the level of participation in a natural way without putting people on the spot. So just to share that in the evaluation with the methods we use, that worked well to try and get different people to participate. Thanks.
Very interesting. Great learning. Thank you so much, Angelica. And yes, we had one final question possibly again for Gubede, you touched at the beginning of your presentation on access and security challenges. And yes, how did you practically overcome these?
I think specifically the community that was flooded, of course. Now the point is, any place, no matter the access challenges, as long as there are people living there, there's access. There's a way they get to those places, right? Might give you an instance. The only reason we couldn't go to the last community where we were currently doing a start fund implementation in Nigeria was because people are not currently living there. The residents of the communities have now been displaced and living within the host community. But in that community where there was flood, as long as people are living there, there's an access. The only difference is the difficulty in access. People were going through boats. I think I should have shared the picture of us flying the boat, right? It may seem scary and daunting, but people access it. What you do is, how do people go to these communities? Because in the end, you are trying to give the real assistance to the real people. Because once you do it from a distance because of the fear or the drawback of access, I assure you, there may be issues with the genesis of your intervention. So what we do is, as long as people that live in those communities can access the communities, who access the communities, that's humanitarian, right? We went there by boat. The other communities, or in cases where people still live in the community and miss crisis, of course, there are security that often take them there. So we always try to have these options explored from our community entry and consultation activities, and try to have all our systems set for access.
Thank you.
I don't know, is that clear enough?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
I pass over to Vipka now for a few more general questions.
Thank you, everyone. I just wanted to give everyone the opportunity to add any other best practices or challenges that you have faced around the access difficulties that Beda was just talking about, and the short-term nature of humanitarian responses. Does any other agency wanted to come in on this question around how can we ensure participation still, and any good practices that any agency is doing? Please feel free just to come off mute or to raise your hand. It'd be great to hear from you. Mohammed, please go ahead.
Hello, yes. Thank you very much for team for organizing this great training that is mainly focused on the meal in the emergency situations. My name is Muhammad Abdullah Muhammad. I am a senior humanitarian officer from Islamic Relief Somalia. It's quite clear what you said and what you presented, both from Team Nigeria and your team. It was something is relevant and also very good into the humanitarian practical, particularly in emergency response situations. If I go to the question or comments, this one is very nice for participation regarding this one. It's need more about consensus regarding to the aid issues and from community level to the, and the field issues to consider about, geographical and context and even what they call the nature of communities to be understanding what is the humanitarian issues and understand about the accountability mechanisms. It's a quite good people to understanding people gender issues, to consider gender inclusions, protection, disabilities, and other vulnerable groups and marginalized to be considered for any phase of humanitarian implementation, such as like crisis and emergency response. Otherwise, what you say today, I am listening. I'm not I was considering and focusing my concentration. It was really something particularly focused on like Africa, in Eastern Africa. Mostly it was adapted and aligned with the cultural, and also Toby was really covered what the people more even the expectation. Thank you very much, team, for giving us this great time and sacrifice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for coming in. And I think I agree. The cultural aspects are very important, and not one approach will be the same in different countries or even in different regions. There was a few other questions in the chat that I wanted to bring up with the full group here. One question was regarding the community feedback mechanisms used in short-term interventions. Does anyone here have any experience of implementing new community feedback mechanisms for short-term intervention, but what happens after the intervention is done? So have you made any efforts to integrate them into long-term efforts, or do they then cease to function after the short-term intervention is done? I wonder if anyone here has any experience around this and would like to come in.
Can I come in?
Of course, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like I saw a question when one of those early sessions, those early questions when you started, when somebody talked about how to support, one of the challenges was how to support the communities for long-term needs of the community. I mean, that rang a bell in my head. I know that start fund is like how do I call it, for the want of word? It's just like a bridge. Start fund intervention does damage control. It's not really long term for sustainable kind of approach for the community as well. So one of the things we've often done in our communities is continuous referral. You know, we don't just go and move out. We don't just go give assistance and close our eyes on the needs of the communities. So when their systems, their networks, their groups and clusters, where meetings are held and feedbacks are shared. So those platforms are where we do referrals. Like if somebody else is going to do an intervention, like a follow-up intervention, I had a start fund intervention in Kebbi or Jigawa, I forgot it, somewhere in the northern part of the country. And another organization was going after us because of the monitoring report we had. I made recommendations that there are still needs in the communities, and all those recommendations from my monitoring report. I was shared in the cluster, and somebody else said they had some funds to take there. But now going back, they did have to start setting up new committees. They had to leverage on our systems. So those systems work during referrals, during continuous interventions from other people that will continue from where we stop during our intervention. So sometimes it's not always exclusive. We do referrals for people to leverage on our systems to continue intervention in the communities. I don't know if I responded to the question as it were. Are you okay?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. I think continuous referrals is a good way, I think, of doing this. I guess that you do coordination with different agencies, don't you, even after a response has been completed, just to ensure kind of consistency. Does anyone else have any comments or wanted to come in on this point? Cool. If not, there is a very good question in the chat from Jean-Claude, which is, at which extent shall we rely on information or data from community structures or groups as representatives of affected population? And this question, I think it relates closely to one of the questions that we had in the poll, that we covered in the poll earlier, around whether your agency works with existing community structures. And everyone but one said that they always work with community structures. So I wonder if anyone would like to share their experience around using community structures as representatives of affected populations, or whether you also engage with community members and specific subgroups directly in addition to the community structures. Please raise your hand if anyone would like to come in on this question.
Hello.
Hello, please go ahead.
Yes. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Mohammed. Thank you very much. This is something that happening in the field level, particularly, where is mostly a new displaced people, and recently it might be from the floods or conflict or drought, whatever it is. So the community needed themselves, to be encouraged the level of governance, to teach them like how they are themselves to advocate in terms of like camp management, is protection, mainstreaming, and service coordination, and even the legal perspective, where they have rights and where they have not the right. And within that one, the community themselves to be choosing themselves the people that will represent them in terms of as a leader, in terms of as an advocate, in terms of as a chairperson. Then the aid organizations and the other, stakeholders can engage the selected person within which will be advocate the right of the people she or he is responsible. Within that one, it's also a very good mechanism because of it is ensure the representation, it is ensure the accountability mechanism, it will ensure what's called by the protection mainstreaming, particular protection coordination is where is the most that can be inhabited GBV and gender-based violence. The aid and others might be communicate with the focal person or the people who are established themselves, and them they have their own choices to select their own communities. But the aid organization is sometimes we try to to give them adequate training and the relevance of governance structure and linking to each other. What are the rights? What are the responsibilities? What are trainings are they need? What are the information are they need? What is the legal is given them in terms of international humanitarian law and international human rights law and other key essential laws regarding to that. Particularly where is the land issue and the problem, people themselves to need them. The international laws and international human rights law allow them that they have a free, water free, healthy, and others, but does it mean to force other people to take their resource? But this is needed to work with the local authorities, the local governments, and host communities to create the process of integration and also some sort of a durable solutions will be, resettle and also enter into the communities to establish themselves as a capital of a market and information sharing among others. So overall, the community themselves, they have right to manage themselves and to choose themselves, and aid needed to be support them in terms of like facilitations, training them, and integrations, which is very important for this matter. The overall, this one might be regions and districts and countries maybe have a different perspective, but generally the community must be given themselves to manage themselves, to judge themselves, and also to be accountable for those who are administrators. The governance system is also very in a place because of this mostly might be nomadic, maybe the people live in the hard-to-reach areas might not know how to govern to each other. Within this process themselves, they will learn how to support themselves, how to coordinate information, how to advocate themselves, how to write, to get in a right for principles. So finally, themselves, they will be realizing the aid organization are doing the best practice and supporting vulnerable people under the humanitarian principles. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing, Mohammed. Some very good points in there. Did anyone else want to come in on this question that Jean-Claude has put into the chat? Okay, I'll take that as a no. There will be opportunity for anyone to come in on any of the questions that we've covered today, even after the event, and to access the information that has been shared from the presenters and anyone else who's come in. We are getting close to the end of this learning event. I just wanted to give one last opportunity for anyone who has any particular best practice to share, or any questions that they want to have answered from the presenters. Are there any final questions or any final comments before we move into one final question from us and for you? No? Okay, cool. We had one final question for you, and following the external evaluation, we have put together a management response and are making some changes to our processes to ensure that we can incentivize AAP a little bit more in short-term humanitarian projects. And we wanted to hear from you regarding how can Start Fund help to encourage, resource and incentivize AAP in Start Fund projects specifically. And I wanted to give you the opportunity through the Mentimeter just to share a little bit of your thoughts with us. That can be on the Mentimeter itself, or it can also be in the chat as well. The question is on the screen. Hopefully you still have the link, and if not, Kiara has just put that into the chat. But please, if you have a few minutes just to think about this question, or would like to come in verbally as well, please do so. And we really look forward to hearing from you regarding this question so we can improve our processes. Does anyone have any comments, want to come in on this question?
Wait, is it something you'd like us to respond to right away?
Yeah, so you can either respond here in the meeting. If you have any comments, please go ahead.
No, I mean, I'm looking through it, like interrogating it in my head. So, yeah. Of
course. We will also share this question with you following the event, so there will be opportunity to respond later on.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay, I'll leave the Mentimeter up for now. If anyone does have any comments that they want to add, please feel free to do so. If there are no further questions for the presenters or for the general group today, thank you very much to everyone for participating in the learning event. We hope that it was useful. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is our first learning event. So we would really appreciate any feedback that you have on what you liked and what you think should be done differently. I'm going to try to launch a really short poll, and it would be really great to get your feedback. There are 4 questions on this poll, and yeah, we would really very much appreciate your feedback so we can adapt our learning events in the future. If we didn't manage to cover a specific question, don't worry, we will collate all of the questions from the chat, and we'll also be looking at pulling together some of the key questions on an online platform to allow you to contribute and access the responses as well after the event. We'll also send around a recording of the event, the presentations, and also the minutes from the learning event in the coming weeks. And once again, thank you very much for your participation, and we hope to see you at one of our future learning events this year. If you are able to stay another minute or so just to respond to that poll, that would be very helpful for us. But thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.